let's call the meeting, and thank you so much for being here. And we're gonna try to cover a number of topics today, and we'll see how far we get. So, does Tom, you want to introduce yourself? We'll just go in order here that I see you on this.
Oh, okay. Dr. Tom Williams, LA 32 Neighborhood Council Director Emeritus, current a stakeholder member of the Land Use and Development Committee. So I've been around 10, 12 years doing neighborhood councils and such. Still working on things like the transit tunnel from UCLA, or let's say from Dorrance to LAX to UCLA to Van Nuys to Silimar, a tunnel. How about that?
Is that still happening?
Transit tunnel.
Is Elon Musk?
Oh yeah, man. In fact, me and Sierra Club are having a big argument regarding whether the tunnel is better than the monorail elevated.
Okay, let's move on to Dick Platkin.
I'm Dick Platkin. I'm a retired city planner. I've been retired for 15 years. When I was a city planner, I worked in the same office with Marianne King, and I just remembered that in the last time I walked out of the office, she did a Antonio Villaraigosa imitation to wish me off. I don't know if she remembers, but I remember. It's a life-size cutout of it.
I do. I have a picture of it.
Oh, okay. And since then, I've taught planning classes at USC and Cal State Northridge. And most of my time now is with a group called United Neighbors for Los Angeles. And I write a weekly column on planning issues for City Watch LA.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to go in order here. Ron Bitzer, you want to say something?
My name's Ron. I'm a board member of a successor group to the Coalition to Ban Billboard Blight in Los Angeles.
That's right.
It's called Scenic LA. The issues surrounding billboards have not gone away, and we're currently monitoring as closely as we can the pending use of more digital billboards and signs. I've also monitored rec and parks in the East San Fernando Valley, where there have been some big issues, including a developer who wanted to get his hands on 5 acres of dedicated parkland to build a multi-story parking structure.
Oh, lovely.
And the recession helped kill that plan, but it didn't hurt to get a well-timed article in the LA Times.
Well, we like that. Marianne, do you want to, I think we started the meeting a little bit early, but why don't you tell us again about yourself and your background in land use and so forth?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Marianne King. I'm also a retired city planner of 1.5 years now, retired. And I'm with the Chatsworth Neighborhood Council. I'm a board member, and I'm on the Land Use Committee, and I chair the Legislative Committee. So that's all I got for now.
Thank you, Marianne. And Philip Armstrong?
Okay, so I got a urban planning degree at USC in 2012. I've mostly worked in the homelessness arena, and I'm currently the president of the Rampart Village Neighborhood Council and the chairperson of the Public Safety, Housing, and Transportation Committee.
Thank you so much.
And I'm also the CD3 appointee to the LA Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Wonderful. And Sandy?
Okay. My name is Sandy Hubbard. I've been one of the fortunate people to take one of Dick Platkin's classes when he was training the neighborhood council folks. I'm a member of the Neighborhood Council Valley Village Residents Association, where I sit and chair the planning and land use committees for both. also a member of United Neighbors, and I'm on the Our Neighborhood Voices initiative.
Wonderful. And I see Liz Amsden just showed up. Liz, you want to give us a 2-minute bio?
Pretty much stepped down from the neighborhood council system. I was a budget advocate since 2014. I care deeply about the city. At the moment, we don't seem to be getting much headway. Planning is a huge concern because the regulations that are being passed actually worked against the interests of affordable housing. And I'm also I'm sort of focusing more on writing for City Watch and getting ideas out there so people can start thinking about things. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're gonna be talking about some of that stuff. We have a lot to cover tonight. This is the July 28th meeting of the Los Angeles Planning Alliance. It was originally formed by Connie Acosta, myself, Dick Platkin, Tom Williams, and Carrie Sutkin. And, basically we're open arms for anybody who's interested in talking about these issues. And we have a website. We talk about what the Planning Alliance is about, and we have topics page, and we have a media page, and we have a calendar where we're showing all of the planning and land use meetings and their agenda, links to the agenda. So the idea originally was that we would be gathering planning and land use committees and supporting them on issues that there was commonality to it, where other planning and land use committees, we could join forces either by area or by topic, just like we were talking earlier, or we will be talking about digital signage. Here's our current agenda for tonight. So we wanted to bring up the topic about inclusionary zoning.
One of my problems right now is trying to find a web page or something that explains to me how the SCAG's housing element, LA City planning will incorporate all of the houses that we're supposed to have in the housing element plan, and how these will relate to ADUs, junior ADUs, mobile homes, etc. So there doesn't seem to be much in the way of a good explanation as to this is how many how many homes we need for the households projected. This is where they're at. This is how it's going to be by the year, say, 2030 or 2029. So I'm just trying to find a web page that might help understand what the hell's going on. That's all.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up was the Los Angeles Congress. So this year on September 24th, this was the response rate of the 2021 Congress, and here's our workshop, and we were number one. So that's great, but I just want to say though that the workshop application is open, and that this was our page last year, and we had a double session, so we were able to cover a lot of these topics, and we're hoping to do that again in this year, which is, again, I said, on September 24th. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Richard, I just want to say I attended that and I thought it was excellent. So kudos to all of you.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Really appreciate hearing that. So this is part of a general comment, but it's going into another topic. So generally, when we talk about housing, that it is it's a kind of a function of financing and money and investment, and then somewhere down the line, it is actually, hey, this is where you live and that kind of thing. And what's happening in another country is that they have no other place to invest their money except real estate, and they've put a great deal of money into real estate, and the result of which was a an overabundance of units, which here in Los Angeles, that'd be great if we had that problem, but it's led to a different problem, and that is the government, the CCP, has to put up this 3 red line policy, which is if you've crossed one line, which a ceiling on your debt to ratio, now we're talking about real estate companies here, okay? And then if you've had, what's your cap on your net debt ratio, and then what's the cap on the short-term debt cash ratio. And if you've crossed those 3 lines, then you're in a problem area. So I'm extrapolating that situation to Los Angeles because we have many different places to invest money, but one of the issues is here's all our top real estate companies, and this graph is just here not as a factual graph, but it's just to show that we're going to fill these numbers in for these companies. I don't know, Dick, do you find that interesting?
I don't really understand the chart.
Okay, so column 1 is liability to assets. Okay, and that's what you call a 6K form. And then net debt to equity. If they're overfinanced, and that could very well happen in Los Angeles. What happens is you have a property and you've invested in it, and then you leverage that property to buy another property, and that's no surprise. And some of our biggest real estate companies, they have to show a balance between their debt and their equity. Like, what is the percentage? This company here, is one of our biggest. These are not the figures for these companies, but what I'm trying to show is, instead of looking at it from, we need affordable housing and here are the means that we can go about doing it, to what is actually happening in Los Angeles with those who are building what they call market rate apartments, and what kind of a financial picture are these people in. In the middle of this crosshair, I believe, is the Department of City Planning, and that we don't want to be in a situation where we've overbuilt so-called market rate housing. Do you see where I'm going, Dick?
Well, I know that I don't see that from the chart, but I understand the concept of overbuilding because I see it everywhere.
Right. We're gonna try to develop this idea a little bit further. I just wanted to introduce it here, and the combination of debt to revenue to net income, and we could possibly produce some kind of infographic on what is the state of our investment community, our real estate development community, as it comes to debt, okay, which is that dashed purple line there. What happened in China was that they had to start cutting bond rates. A lot of these buildings are fronted with bonds and so forth, and they had cutting the rate of the development teams because they were overextended. That has to do with this. So anyway, it's just an idea I wanted to introduce. It's the other side of the land use questions, where we can say, well, what is actually going on with the output from the Department of City Planning, the entitlements, our infrastructure, how does that all weigh up? Because what happened in China was that they had plenty of infrastructure, and that's where all these new developments happened, okay? But now nobody's living in them because they're just investment vehicles. Well, we have just the exact problem in a way. We have aging infrastructure, and we have TOCs and other kinds of entitlement and market rate entitlement projects burdening on top of our infrastructure. So, it may be something of interest to us, but maybe not. I don't know. I'm just introducing it as an idea. And this is an internal document where I'm showing here that the California Department of Community Development, I think it's called the CDCAC. This is a $27 million project, as you can see here. And it's got, I think, 6% affordable housing. And this money is coming directly, this $2.5 million is coming directly out of the California Treasury. And it's going, in this particular case, it's going to New Jersey. And someone said, and I haven't done the figures, that this is quite a lot of money per affordable unit in terms of our tax money going to support market rate housing, which has a component of affordable housing. So that's something else again. Let's get back to our agenda. So
Wait, excuse me, wait. Did I understand you correctly that that money is going to the state of New Jersey?
yes, of course, yes, it's going. It's being removed from the California. This is a document from the treasurer. I'd be happy to send it to you, Lois, anytime you'd like. But yes, this is California state money collected from taxes, and the state of California gives allowances, funds based upon either affordable units, and this is the complete breakdown of the financing of the project. The fee approved by this department that is going to the developer who's in New Jersey. So
Well, yeah, it's fine. It just seems outrageous to me that we're doing stuff like that. And so, yes, please send it to me, and then I want to know who the legislators are that are allowing this to happen. And we certainly don't need to be doing that sort of thing anymore.
these things are approved at City Hall. Sorry, Philip, I didn't, I got to scroll around to see that. Philip, go ahead.
How does that compare to what the gentleman was talking about in the Six City presentation?
So that's Patrick Condon, and he couldn't make it. His point was that when the Department of City Planning grants density bonuses for affordable housing, almost immediately what happens is the land value goes up. Now, in the past, it would go up like 30-40%. Well, it's up to 80% now. What happens is then that land becomes so valuable that the rents go up and the neighborhood changes. It's a whole different formula. What we're talking about is this inclusionary zoning ordinance would apply to all multifamily rental development of greater than 7 units, basically. 30% of the total units would be 80% average monthly income, according to the county statistics, and would be available as affordable units. And is it shared equally across the city? And then what outs do the developers have? Is there how can they comply with this proposed ordinance and not have to provide the affordable units? And there's answers to that. One of our local cities, Glendale, has an affordable inclusionary zoning ordinance already in place, and they're more around the 15% and 60 AMI figure, is to mandate the development of more affordable units with every single project going up.
I do have a concern. First of all, builders will only build if they can make a profit. And I think the bigger picture issue is, what does Los Angeles really need? Profit for developers, or is housing a human right? Los Angeles does not need any more market rate housing. There's no such thing as trickle down housing. And there are more units currently standing empty than there are homeless people on our streets. On another issue you brought up, the Chinese investor issues have not stayed in China. Los Angeles is suffering because those same development companies have halted construction on a number of buildings that are actually in limbo, unusable lots in the city. And the continuing corruption at our city hall is creating ongoing problems. Furthermore, somebody brought up Poppy Peak, and waivers on properties like that are creating endangering lives because they're narrow access. Again, as you said, there's pressure on infrastructure, but it all boils down to is the cost, because it is so expensive. And the question is, what's driving that expense versus the need for housing? And I don't know that answer, but I'm hoping to learn more.
I have something to say about that, but I'd like to hear, Marianne, what do you have to say about that?
Just some thoughts, how I'm thinking about all these proposed, legislation for kind of giveaways. I shouldn't say it like that, but anyways, no parking requirement, anything within a transit oriented area, 1/2 mile of a major transit. So I'm wondering and there's the city planning is looking at affordable housing overlay zone. So I'm wondering how what you're thinking about here, inclusionary zoning, which I'm very much a proponent of, but how it may or may not fit into, if you are proposing something, is it maybe this should be also within 1/2 mile of a major transit area instead of the whole entire city. I don't know how, and I would look at the affordable housing overlay zone, I think, planning report that they submitted to the city council, because there's a lot of gray area there. So I'm just curious what you're thinking about may or may not fit in with that.
Okay, so on the first part of it, it's expensive, and how do we afford that? If you take a look at, maybe as those who have been at city planning and me as an architect, that there are so many things that are costly with construction. We have, all those floors and floors of smart people in Washington, D.C. who put together the building standards and the specifications for steel, and then we have flame spread and fire safety and exit width, and we have to have all these requirements for construction and what type of construction for what purpose and so forth, and then we need air conditioning, and we need green. We're into the green construction right now. Well, all of these things have a financial aspect to it, all of them. And when people say, developers won't build if it's going to cost too much, well, that's just to say that they already have absorbed a whole lot of things into their formula and still seem to be making money. And when we go into the analysis of where they are with debt to equity, that we may shed a light on that formula. In other words, what I'm saying is, we're putting ourselves back by saying we can't ask for what they won't build, because they're already building stuff that takes into account a lot of modern concepts and requirements from the building department that have to do with life safety. And now we're getting into, look at the whole energy thing that happened in the 70s. Go ahead, Dick.
Well, it's true that the building code and the zoning code has requirements, but there's no enforcement of any requirements that developers build low-priced units. If you apply for transit-oriented community density bonuses, you have a requirement to build so many affordable units. And there's another previous density bonus unit, but there's no enforcement. No one from the city's housing department or building and safety or city planning ever goes out to these buildings to confirm that these units exist. And the housing and community development department has assembled a registry, but it's very inaccurate, of available units, but there's no registry of available vetted tenants. So we have to realize that not only do developers not like to build buildings and units where they'll lose money. They're a business. They're not a philanthropy. They're a private business. But even if they want it to be a philanthropy, there's no one to verify that these units are constructed or that they're filled with people who qualify for them. So that's a major defect in the city. But I want to amplify a little bit more. At one time, low-priced, low-cost units were largely built through public housing. The city of LA built its own public housing until the federal government during the New Deal created the Federal Housing Authority in about 1934. And by 1936, the public housing in Los Angeles was assumed by the federal government. Now, this ended during the Nixon administration. During the Nixon administration, most public housing programs were gradually eliminated. There no longer are programs to build public housing. I mean, there are programs, but they're very inconsequential. But nevertheless, there are still 2 million people in the United States who live in legacy public housing. And you can see it in LA. In LA, it's in Chinatown. It's on Bunker Hill in Little Tokyo. It's mostly senior housing. It's still operated by the Housing Authority, and it's very successful. And part of the effort to turn over housing, low-priced housing, to private developers includes inclusionary housing. Under inclusionary housing, the requirement to build low-priced housing is transferred to the developers. So I think in LA, even if you had inclusionary housing ordinances, and there have been ones in the past proposed, I don't think they would work. They might, because there is no enforcement there, and the developers will do everything they can to dodge the requirement, and there's no way to ensure that the people who qualify for this housing will actually be able to be housed in it. I mean, that's why I contend that if you want to build low-priced housing, you cannot depend on private developers to do it, which is the strategy of inclusionary housing. You have to reactivate, you have to refund public housing programs. And there also was statewide public housing that was done through the community redevelopment agencies. California used to have over 200 redevelopment agencies. They were dissolved by the California state legislature in 2011, and 20% of all their budgets, including for the CRA in LA, had to go to either direct construction of public housing or subsidized public housing. And I'm very skeptical about inclusionary zoning. And I should also add that a previous member of the city council, Ed Reyes, who represented, I think, areas like the downtown and Eagle Rock and so forth, he proposed an inclusionary zoning ordinance. He could not get it through the city council. And as far as I know, Richard, you said, if I understood you, you said city planning is opposing it. Is there an actual proposal in LA to have inclusionary zoning?
Not as yet.
So we don't even, I mean, I don't even know if city planning would oppose it. I don't know where that came from, but I think the approach of city planning is, yeah, anything that will transfer the responsibility for low-priced housing to the private sector is fine with them. I don't think city planning would oppose inclusionary zoning because it fits into their model of privatization.
It's puzzling, Dick. I have to say it's puzzling because having been at some city planning commission meetings, when some of these questions have come up, they table and they don't respond to appeals properly, which gets back to the other problem you brought up, which is the enforcement side of it. So now the Department of City Planning is enforced by the Department of Building and Safety, and that to me that's never worked. If we have a foothold for inclusionary zoning under whatever manner we can do that, we would have to have either a citizens review board or some kind of other level of authority of people who are not appointed by the mayor, but are in, either elected or some other kind of authoritative position where we have in conjunction with maybe even the fire department, going out and looking at every single affordable unit and seeing if it's being managed correctly. And a lot of this stuff is covered in zoning administration declarations, ZADs and MNDs, and they say in detail, here's what's supposed to be going on in this with this property. This agreement runs in perpetuity. All of this stuff is spelled out, but you're right. It's not enforced, and the reason for that is it's a problem with the Department of City Planning. We've got a lot of highly paid, very intelligent folks over there. They come up with all kinds of, tools and analysis, and they're reviewing all these projects and so forth, and they're just, basically is what I'm saying. We're spending a lot of money on putting these declarations and MNDs out there, and then, like you say, they just nobody pays any attention, and especially what I've noticed is with some of the developers that have come in, they hire high-priced attorneys and so forth, and basically local planning and land use committees are meeting with attorneys, okay, and presenting the projects and so forth, but they're not, in my opinion, going through this process, the entitlement process that we all know exists at the committee level in the neighborhood council system. Each neighborhood can advise the Department of City Planning on the efficacy of a particular entitlement, but it's not an egalitarian process. Unfortunately, I feel, from what I've seen from people at the Department of City Planning, there's maybe 1 in 10 that is willing to help you. I was actually told, I'm the chair emeritus for the Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Council Planning and Land Use Committee, and I called one person, and I was told by an employee, well, you should call 311. I was told to call 311, and I'm an elected representative. So the problem, you could say, actually, does this have to do with the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment? Does this have to do with the Department of City Planning? But basically, I'm agreeing with you. To me, our city bureaucracies are freewheeling. They're just doing whatever it is that what makes their job easier, and a developer comes in maybe once or twice a week. Average Joe or Jane, city residents, goes into the Department of City Planning maybe once a lifetime. So there's that familiarity too, but I just don't think that I don't think that they're.
Well, maybe Marianne has a different take or more current information, but as far as I can tell, the situation will change because the city's housing element calls for upzoning in all 35 community plan areas, and there are a few of the community plans, like in the North Valley, I'm not sure, I don't think Chatsworth, but some of the other areas in the North Valley, they have been updated, but the city council has said every community plan must be updated on a 6-year cycle. So there's 16 or 17 that are underway, all of the South Valley, all of West LA, Hollywood is ready to go. But once they are updated, they will each have an upzoning ordinance. So once you upzone, vast swaths of LA, hundreds of thousands of parcels would be upzoned. You no longer need to have a density bonus. So, and when you give automatic upzoning, there's no requirement for low-income housing. So, if you did adopt an inclusionary zoning ordinance, it would plug this loophole.
Yes.
And it would make sure that every parcel, every new project has to have something, but without enforcement, it still would be, the loophole would still be there from a different.
Let's hear from Liz. She had her hand up for a while, and I've neglected to call on her.
Thanks. I think that Dick has mentioned some of this. There's a huge conflict of interest between developers whose intent is profit, and they have years in gaming the system with their lawyers. I agree that we should be looking at public housing, not the ghetto towers, which is what the mid-century system in the US basically deteriorated into, with developers draining the government funds. We do need public housing for the 2020s. We need to revisit zoning and building codes to provide for short-term housing. We need to get people off the streets right now. We can do that by converting empty offices and mall space. By setting timeframes, we can waive some of the rules, but we should not be waiving any CEQA rules. We need to address infrastructure. Some examples have been APLA has done some SRO hotel conversions that are, I think, less than a quarter of the cost of the HHH apartments. And we should not allow any market rate housing construction at all have any waivers. This construction along the transit zones is for the birds. All it does is create housing that and that leads to more gentrification, which is not the intent and should not be the intent. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Marianne?
Sure. So I wanted to kind of get back a little bit to, well, first things first, right? So your interest is to, hope for inclusionary zoning ordinance that would, for everything, for every multifamily, over 7 units, which I think is a great idea. I do remember, Dick, that was like in 2003 when Reyes came out with that, and he was only asking for 5% or something like that, and it was just like a big problem.
It got shut down.
Huh?
His project.
Oh yeah, big time.
Down.
Yeah, and I was totally. I thought that this is perfect. But so here we are, 20 years later, and what we have is all this emphasis within a half mile of transit, and Sacramento continues with AB 2097 and SB 1067. They're pushing for no parking minimum within a half mile of transit. And what's the reason? Well, it lowers the cost. And so there you can provide, you can incentivize developers, you can provide affordable housing, but there's no affordable housing requirement. And so that's why I'm kind of honing in. I want to plant the seed on this half mile emphasis. Everyone's just like going for it. But there's no guarantee of affordable housing units, so or low-income units, I should say. So that is where I think this would come into play. Like at the moment, if the city's going to turn a blind eye and Sacramento goes through with a no parking minimum, then we're losing out. And the only reason, and one of the SB 1067, by the way, this is Hertzberg's, I guess, baby. The only way you can deny a project within a half mile of transit, no parking requirement, is if you can show it would have a negative impact on meeting specific housing needs. So let's just say, the housing element from SCAG or RENA, low income units, and how does then the city would have to say, hey, no, you can't do 100% market rate here because we need to fulfill our low income housing. Anyways, it's very cumbersome, and I like the inclusionary zoning, and I think it would fit in well with a half mile and the no parking minimum, which I'm not a fan of, but I'm just saying, I'm tired of things being interfering with our efforts, the city's efforts I would say, to try to provide affordable housing. Sacramento just keeps giving giveaways. So it's like without any requirement for affordable housing, that's a huge problem. So there, I'm done. Thank you.
Would, in terms of what's happening with city planning, was there any more commentary about that? Because a lot of this has to do with not only, you know, the laws is what you were just talking about, all the laws coming down and they're dictating, basically, it looks like to me like they're dictating from Sacramento. And they're sort of removed from, I believe, what's actually happening in Los Angeles. I don't know how many people come to Los Angeles, but it's really unbelievable to me. And
I mean, people who work in Los Angeles and drive in?
yeah, do they? These aren't the people up in Sacramento making these bills. You know, we have a local senator here, Maria Elena Durazo. She's running for re-election on November, and I spoke to a write-in candidate today, and I at a public meeting, and I'm like, why was that bill signed? And then I've contacted her office at least a dozen times, and I've gotten nothing. When we want to find out, well, why did you sign that bill? What was the idea behind it? I think it was 330. I forget which one it was now. But
well, I have an answer. Most of the zoning giveaway type projects that other people have spoken about go through Sacramento rather than an individual fight in each city because it's easier. You get much more bang for your buck with the Scott Wiener than you do with Eunices Hernandez, you know, or something like that. I mean, it's just very efficient for developers to lobby the state legislature in Sacramento. The cities have much less influence, and developers and their lobbyists have a lot of influence, which is why most planning and zoning legislation goes through the state legislature. That's the reason. And there's very, very minimal press coverage. Jill Stewart said when she started in the LA Times, there were all of these reporters who covered the state legislature in Sacramento. Now there's only a couple. So that's another reason they want to do it.
we have these kind of unusual projects going on. This was one in Chinatown. And the other thing that came up this week was that a lot of these projects get the density bonus because they're TOCs. Well, now, I don't know if you've heard, but city planning wants to include dash lines
Yeah.
in that formula. Did everybody hear me? Dash lines, you know what I mean? I mean, have you?
They're shuttles, basically a shuttle, a neighborhood
Right.
shuttle.
Have you seen the map of where your local dash lines go? I mean, it's and the fact that there's very little going on with infrastructure. Here's some low density housing that could be considered. This was actually a competition that happened in Chicago, and Chicago has not exactly the same situation that Los Angeles does in terms of the demand, but some of these ideas I think could be incorporated here, where we're talking about low density housing these wouldn't fall under inclusionary zoning, but there's still, I think, ideas that we should.
Well, Richard, let me ask you a question. The one in the upper left corner looks like it's a small lot subdivision.
This is even
The
local.
one, I mean, that in LA, that would be built as a small lot subdivision. Those units sell for about $1 million each. So you need, if you want to go spend $1 million on a small house, it meets that niche. But if you want to create low cost affordable housing, that type of housing wouldn't meet the requirements in LA. Now, I don't know the other. It looks like the one in the bottom might also be a small lot subdivision. So these, I suspect if we could find land in LA where you could build this housing, it would not be low-cost housing. It would be, these are units that would basically be small houses, 2 bedrooms, 1 or 2 stories, that would sell for $1 million each. Now,
Well, it could
that's
be.
a lot cheaper than 2 million, but it's a lot more than people who are homeless can afford.
Yes, you're right. There's some units like this in Lincoln Heights. I don't think I have that one up, where, you know, we're basically the most economically challenged community in the city. I'm in Lincoln Heights. That a developer came in, Foresight, and they tore down some of those old, you know, 1916 bungalows, and they put up a project that would fit on this page, and now they're being sold for, I think, $850. So that's in that range you're talking about. But whether they sell or not, Dick, you know, that's the other part of the story. If what happened in China happens in Los Angeles, or what appears to be happening in China, which is a housing bubble, okay, and that's going to be pretty drastic. And would that happen here? We see all of these apartments for rent in Los Angeles starting at $4,000, especially from my area going west, that there are a lot of units in the arts district, and you know that area around the historic state park is really, you know, blooming. And but there are other projects that may be more suitable. This is a project in mid Wilshire, actually, where these are townhomes and affordable housing.
I don't believe they're affordable. I mean, how much are they selling for or renting for? I mean, I live in the Mid Wilshire area.
Can you see the name of the
Running apartments, Dunning Apartments. I don't know where Carlton Street is, but
28? It's Hollywood.
I don't know these projects, but I would doubt that they're low-priced housing.
I just looked on the website. It's 2,000 to 3,200, which may be affordable in that area. Yeah, if you Google it, the 5552 Carlton Way, it's 2,000 to 3,200, 1 to 2 bedroom. That's what they're saying.
Well, we should look it up. We should have.
Exactly.
This is something that people would say, we can't build this, it's too expensive, you know, but here it is. Here's the story on affordable housing, the AMI, area median income. I said average monthly before. Determined by LA County, a family of 2 or more would need earn a minimum of 16, 5, 22, or 27 to qualify for a unit. That relates to this chart here. This is administered out of the county, and this is how it's currently working in terms of applicants and what the median income is. And we were talking about the financing, developing aspect to it. To build affordable housing is accomplished through these tools.
Well, those are some of the tools that are generally, if I'm speaking out of turn, you can just tell me because I didn't raise my hand.
No,
Sorry.
go ahead, Lois, no problem.
Those are some of the tools, but of course, some of you know that there is a community land trust movement in the city of Los Angeles, and this should be accelerated, and it essentially permanently removes housing and land from the speculative real estate market, and that is really what's called for. And those goals as to how much land should be and housing should be removed from the speculative real estate market should be tied, in my opinion, to each 10-year census. A particular geographical area within the census, how many people are at below 50% AMI, 50 to 80%, over 80 to 120%, and that's the areas of housing that should be being built and or removed from the marketplace in those areas. Until we start thinking in that kind of creative way, with annual certifications and also car-free housing and marketing to people who choose to live car-free with, again, annual certifications and humongous penalties for violations. Those are a few of the ideas that I think are bubbling up to the surface among some of the grassroots groups.
I totally agree with that. What we've depended upon is egalitarian organizations like Abode, and this particular chart grew out of a conversation with Hollywood. I think it's called Hollywood Community Housing. They're making it work.
Yeah.
What does it
Yeah.
mean they're making it work?
Well, they have projects where they have affordable housing, and the access to it is achieved through applications through the county, and then people are given homes if they can comply with this.
Well, I mean, do we have numbers? I mean, because I would say most people believe, and I think they're correct, that the homeless crisis in LA is getting worse and worse and worse, despite programs.
Yes, we're doing this. Part of this is seeding. I mean, we are looking at what has been done, what's worked, where are we with the real estate investment thing, with they're just piling millions of dollars and having our tax money go into supporting, they call it market rate, but it's actually displacing luxury units and with very little affordability, and weighing in on our infrastructure freely. And yeah, we're looking at all these things and the enforcement picture, and we need to coalesce this into a proposal.
Well, I'd like to see some numbers if possible. Lois, Lois, who I knew when I worked in city planning, how successful are the programs that you talked about, like the land trusts? Are there some?
Extraordinarily successful. In the Los Angeles Eco Village, we have 50 units of permanently affordable housing for 99 years. The County Board of Supervisor Hilda Solis last year allocated $14 million so that there could be at least a demonstration community land trust in each of the 5 supervisor districts. There are about a dozen now CLTs throughout Southern California, and they're doing very well. Now, in the case of the housing that I developed here in the LA Eco Village, we used an absolute minimum of public money. I think we got a $25,000 service repayment loan from the CRA, and then a $250,000 service repayment loan from when at the point the CRA was closing down. But we did get that, and now it's all paid off. But we, when you buy old properties, and our buildings are 100 years old this year, and when you buy old properties, generally speaking, a nonprofit or for-profit developer relocates all the tenants out, pays them all to move out, and then retrofit or rehabs the units at as much as $250,000 per unit, and then goes on to make their housing, get their housing filled up again. But we didn't do things that way. We never relocated any people out of our housing. Through natural attrition, we moved people in, and we also formed an intentional community, which with the dozen or so LA tenant union groups throughout the city of LA, that is something that they could really be working on, is forming, organizing their buildings. And I think CES does a lot of that, and a couple of other organizations, where the buildings, once the buildings are organized, they can, there are any number of ways that those buildings can be bought, including with money from the people who actually live in the buildings, and through creating many of the nonprofit organizations that are members of SCAMP, which you're all familiar with, the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. you know, there are hundreds of nonprofit developers in Southern California, and they pretty much do things like what you're listing here, in low-income tax credits, um, um, uh, grants from foundations and so forth. And but you know, there's another way to do it without using substantially public monies, and that's what we did. We borrowed money from our friends, and we created our own loan fund, and we bought all of our properties, $2.5 million worth, with money that we borrowed from friends, and have paid back all of it.
And I'd
So,
like, thank you so much, Lois. And I'd like to talk about new construction. People always think, well, new construction, well, how can we do that? But here's a little breakdown on different types of construction that is allowed within the building code and how these different types are used. Well, this type 5 is very interesting. That this is a very interesting building. It's on Alvarado and Sunset. And what they've done here is they've put the circulation on the outside of the building, and this is a type 5, basically wood construction, and it's more economical. And in this particular case, I think, Dick, do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't know this project.
It's right off the corner of Alvarado and Sunset. This is on
I
Alvarado.
probably have driven by it, but I haven't noticed it.
Yes, it's fascinating. It's a really economic way of building affordable housing using protected wood construction. It's got parking below grade. The thing of it is that it does not exceed the height limit of 45 feet. It wouldn't need a variance, and it has these potential setbacks. It works within the existing zoning and is not a hugely expensive way of building.
So what would the units rent for? Do you have any idea?
I would have to look that one up. I don't know.
I mean, my own view is if all of these things, like the stuff that Echo Village, which I'm familiar with, if these are models, they need to obviously be replicated. But I think all of these efforts to somehow manipulate the private market will still leave us more or less in the same situation where we are, where the number of homeless people increases because wages have been stagnant. Over half the population lives paycheck to paycheck. When it's inflation of 8 or 9% per year after year, it means most people have a declining standard of living, and people are priced out of housing. The price of housing generally goes up, and people's incomes generally goes down. And until this is addressed, this is just going to be secondary or tertiary to the real problem. I mean, we have to be able to address the issue of declining income and wages and be able to redirect public money into public housing, which that's the end of public housing, and the stagnant wages are the main causes of the housing crisis. And if we don't address that, we're still going to be stuck with the reality of LA, which is homelessness is increasing all the time.
It's such a terrible disconnect. Near here right now, we have this project. It was originally framed as a much smaller building. This is how this building was proposed. You can see this is Dodger Stadium is up here, and this is the historic park, and this is these buildings are in white here on either side of the park, and then of course this is Solana Canyon, I believe. And as the development on this bloomed, it became this. It went from a 6 to 8 story building to a much bigger building. They don't really show how tall this building is now. And this is the type of thing that we are experiencing. This is not built yet, but this is the type of thing that is being financed and is going forward and is filling up that coffer of luxury units, and besides doing all the other things that are unhelpful, contributing to the factors that you were just talking about, Dick. What do you think about this?
So it's right next to the rail system?
Yeah, that's right up on the ridge above the
Chinatown.
historic park. Yeah, in Chinatown.
I mean, I don't know. I think it would be a tough sell to get people to rent a luxury apartment that's built that close to rail.
This is the goal line.
Yeah, so there's a train that comes every 15 or 20 minutes.
Probably not. And they have this great view of the park and everything. And the gondola going over.
Having a housing adjacent to rail is quite common in any number of cities all over the world.
Well, yeah, that's true. In New York, you have it historically, Queens and
It's a good
Brooklyn.
idea, actually, but it may not be a good project.
It's said that there is a portion of this is affordable, but the inclusionary zoning would take a hit on projects like this. If 30% of these units had to be affordable, that would change the whole financing picture.
Is there parking? I'm not sure why we are
Oh, yeah.
still building so much parking. So these kinds of projects need to radically reduce the parking, and those parking spaces that are costing like $50,000 to $75,000 per space need to go back into the affordable units. An absolute minimum of parking, and that then the projects have to be marketed to people who live car-free and with annual certifications and humongous penalties.
Lois, the reason that a lot of these buildings have parking is because that's the only way they can get financing. And the reason is the people who can afford the rents are rarely using public transit. Most people who use public transit are low income in LA, and the people who can afford apartments like this are in the top, probably 10 to 20%
It's got
income. That's the reason they have parking.
Well, that's why we need a radical culture change in this city.
There's no doubt about that.
This building is 5 minutes from the 5 and about a minute and a half from the 110. Okay, I think Marianne had her hand up first. Marianne, go ahead.
Hi, I'm just curious how you came up with 30% for the inclusionary zoning.
I'll tell you how amongst our alliance, we're contacting and emailing each other pretty frequently, and I reached out to Patrick Condon, and actually that was his recommendation. He was the one who has, besides Dick, inspired us with writing and coming up with the language to formulate a policy that we can raise our voices with, and it was Patrick's perception of my agenda, which started out at 15 and 60, and went. After speaking to him, he says we should be aiming higher, and that's not a bad idea. So he suggested 30 and 80. So that's how 80% AMI, and that's where we're at now.
Is any other jurisdiction that you know of doing that?
No.
I think it should be a strong foundation, whatever you're thinking about, and with backup to show that, hey, it's working elsewhere.
That's true.
30% seems high to me. It seems like a scary thing, like everyone's gonna be, oh God, no. So anyways, I just throw that out there. Hopefully fish some more and see if you can find something that really bolsters what you're thinking about.
Okay. We'll do that. I wanted to go back to the other, here's another project that's near there.
Hi, this is Sandy. I did put my hand up, but perhaps you didn't see it.
Oh, Cindy, I'm
I
sorry.
did want to respond. Yeah, I wanted to respond to everyone who's saying that we got to get away from parking and all of this stuff. I think what we need to do perhaps is rethink how parking is done as opposed to getting away from parking per se. I'm an IT person, and I have to tell you that I need to have my car every day of the week because I have to take hardware with me wherever I'm going. And that could be 10 minutes away, it could be an hour away. I'm not the only one. There are other people who, our landscape people, the people who provide services in our homes that go all over the city. Women who need to get somewhere at night and don't feel comfortable or safe taking public transport. So maybe when we're talking about parking, if you want to say we should eliminate it, maybe we should think more about creating more public parking, where perhaps you have a building on the street where parking is for multiple buildings, so that it doesn't require a specific cost per building, but the tenants could all share in the cost of a building that was specifically parking. And then as time goes on and we find alternate ways to do energy efficient transportation, then perhaps those buildings could be replaced with modular housing units to repurpose the parking structure.
I hear you. I think a lot of people would agree with that. It's just that we have competing forces, and some people look at the car as the problem, and what's the easiest thing to eliminate? The city has gone ahead with the let's get rid of cars thing, and they're right now we're embarked on this TOC concept, which, by the way, only happens in Mexican American communities, which are very dependent on cars. And of course, transportation, our transportation choices as well, but it's not happening. This program, I keep a list of a database of every single TOC project in the city, and we could go through them one by one. I'm making a map to show where each one is located and a bubble as far as how big this TOC project is. But
yeah, I live in Valley Village. Trust me when I tell you, we're very familiar with TOC communities. We're not a primarily people of color community. We're very well mixed in terms of the various ethnicities. But I would say, because of our proximity to both the red line and the orange line, a half a mile really goes a long way when you start looking in those big circles around the orange line station or the red line station. And a great deal of our community is going to become a TOC community.
what do you think about that?
I think our focus hasn't been isn't going to be where it makes sense for our community. We have commercial corridors that we believe should be built up, and that would reduce some level of traffic. I think a half a mile is really long. If you've ever tried to walk across Magnolia at Laurel Canyon while it's raining, and that's only 3 blocks, we don't have any of the normal infrastructure that many communities did that were built after the World War II era. We were World War II build, so we don't have a lot of the street improvements that other communities have. You really wade up to your mid calf in water trying to get over to the supermarket. Tell me you're really not going to take a car in that, and that you're going to walk.
Yeah.
There are cities that have a high pedestrian level, like New York City, but they have an enormous public transit system of subways and buses, and in Manhattan, and at least in Brooklyn, you never have to walk more than 3 or 4 blocks to get any kind of mass transit. But so until we have a comparable infrastructure, I don't see how you're going to be able to persuade anybody but low-income people to become transit dependent. I mean, at this point, most of the people who use mass transit are elderly or handicapped or students. They're not the early adapter types who could, if they could afford a car, they would take it, but have chosen, like, what did Lois say? I mean, they have voluntarily chosen to go carless. It's a tiny percentage of the population of people who are in transit, couldn't be more than a few percent. And we have to build out the transit system first to be able to persuade people to give up the car.
I think that Dick's made a very good point, as has Sandy. We need a proper public transportation system that will serve the needs of everybody before we think about cutting back on the car culture. I grew up in Montreal. I've lived and worked in New York, Toronto, Montreal, London, Vienna. They have public transportation. Seoul has almost 1,000 metro stations. Los Angeles, I don't think it hits 100. We cannot serve communities. Also, we're a hilly city. You can't expect senior citizens or handicapped people to walk half a mile up and down hills in rain carrying groceries. The city's focus is just dead wrong in terms of that. I mean, I'm all for public transportation. I would use it, but it doesn't exist here.
This image you see on the screen is a proposal for the river as it runs east side here. And I always marvel, this is put out by the Bureau of Engineering, by the way. What this is, I believe, is the piggyback yards, and they put a whole new level on it. And I marvel at the fact that this is a really serious plan the city has been spending millions of dollars on. You see all these people here, and my question is, how did they get here?
It's kind of like the Grove. They drive to the Grove to become a pedestrian when they arrive.
Have you ever tried to drive around there?
I do every day, yes. It's very tough.
It's really tough. But anyway, these are the plans that we're having this, like, I don't know, a crazy bunch of ideas. And if the real estate bubble actually happens, that's another aspect to it. But I think we're about ready to close the meeting, unless I think what we'll do is we'll agendize a lot of the topics that we heard tonight. We can talk more about the car. We can talk more about enforcement. And if anybody has any particular neighborhood council land use issues, we've been involved in the Warner Center conversation and some of the others. What's going on with the gondola? I don't know if some of these areas we've been looking at, actually, proposals are now for gondolas to go sweeping down from various locations, and they're supposed to be basically transportation amenities. But
well, I have one more point then for us to consider for next time.
Okay.
When mass transit is built, it needs to be built properly with first and last mile amenities at all of the stations. So, for instance, I live a few blocks from the Purple Line extension. It goes down Wilshire Boulevard in the neighborhood I live in. And we, people in my neighborhood, a lot of planning people interested in planning issues, have heavily lobbied Metro to have a first mile, last mile program. First, that means that you have feeder systems, so all of the buses have a place to stop at the subway stations. There's places for parking, places for bicycles. You have tree planting. You have a good electronic readout. I mean, the full treatment of basically a smart system, complete streets. There's another name for it. And all we have gotten from Metro is a public participation system with a proposal, but Metro isn't funding the proposal, and the city of LA isn't funding the proposal. So the result is there is no first mile, last mile amenities for the new Purple Line extension. It's they might have it in Beverly Hills, but it won't have it in the city of Los Angeles. There won't be any parking. There's no parking for anyone. There's no place for buses to interface. There's no places for bicycles. There's no parking for scooters. All the scooters that we see, you would have to go to the sidewalk to find one nearby because there's no place at these subway stations for scooters or for bicycles. I mean, that's crazy. There's no signage to tell people how to go. There's no bicycle lanes on the streets. There's nothing. So we have to address the fact that Metro has to make sure that it builds subways that are designed to entice people to use them rather than just be a pretext for real estate development. That's all it is in my neighborhood.
Totally agreed, and I could add to that these TOC developments should have aspects that reflect that. They should have, if they're going to have these TOC projects, then they should have accountability towards different forms of transportation. I see it in other projects, but not around here. I have to say, for a city of well-known architects like Los Angeles is, I'm really disappointed in the quality of architecture that I see being foisted. I wonder to myself, these people just so politically well connected, they just get the contract and it's just garbage. I don't see any site plan work that I consider to be well done, with rare exception. We've tried to engage the American Institute of Architects, and I don't think I'm being overly critical. I see just terrible site planning, especially where the I/O of these TOCs is ridiculous. They put so much more confusion on the street. They don't account for how people actually get to their transportation connection, which Dick was just talking about. It's just not part of the formula. It's just really a vehicle to use tax money through the California Community Development Association to put tax money and send it off to other states for luxury TOCs, which don't address our affordability problem or our homeless problem, and just put an extra burden on our infrastructure. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I think I'm going to call the meeting. I hope that everyone here is interested in joining us again next month. We're getting closer to the workshop, which will be in September 24th at the Los Angeles Congress. I believe but that I thank you for your support, and if we work together, I think we could make some progress on these topics. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.